The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, as the whole world now knows, in the early morning of January 3rd, President Donald Trump ordered a military operation into the nation of Venezuela. With impressive precision, U.S. forces were able to bomb important military targets and to capture and arrest dictator Nicholas Maduro while he was sleeping, quite literally, and remove him from power. Maduro was taken into custody and flown to New York City to be processed on various criminal charges. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed on CBS Evening News that the strikes were narrowly tailored and executed with support from the Department of Justice, describing the mission as a law enforcement exercise backed by military force rather than a regime change war similar to the failures of the George W. Bush era. Hegseth emphasized that the operations avoided the large-scale troop deployments that defined the neoconservative nation-building wars of the 2000s, while efficiently securing U.S. interests. We saw the exact same approach from President Donald Trump in Iran, where many were urging him to launch a full-scale invasion with troops on the ground and ultimately mass casualties. Instead, he projected American power in a very controlled and limited way to achieve his objectives and the objectives of the United States. Hegseth is right when he said that what happened in Venezuela is the opposite of Iraq. We spent decades and purchased in blood and got nothing economically in return in the Iraq War. President Trump flipped the script. Strategic action that secures resources, ends criminal activity, and doesn't cost American lives. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a good friend of mine, played a central role in shaping and executing the entire operation. Rubio has made the Western Hemisphere the core focus of the Trump administration's newly unveiled national security strategy, explicitly prioritizing the Americas over post-Cold War Atlantic frameworks. During a press conference Saturday, Rubio described Maduro as a fugitive who wanted to play tough guy, and now he's facing the consequences. He warned that other authoritarian regimes in the region, particularly Cuba, that should be concerned following the resounding success of the mission in Venezuela. President Trump's critics, of course, immediately accused him of hypocrisy because Maduro was essentially taken into custody and is charged with narco trafficking in the same time period in which President Trump issued a full and unconditional pardon for the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez. But the cases are not even remotely similar. Here's why. Hernandez is innocent. If you will examine his trial, what you will learn is that President Juan Orlando Hernandez was the first president in Honduran history to sign an extradition treaty with the United States. That actually required a change in the Honduran constitution. And Orlando Hernandez successfully extradited two major narco traffickers, both of whom had a long history of murder. When Biden became president, he essentially took testimony against those two narco traffickers and mass murderers, gave them their freedom, let them out of jail in return for their false testimony against Hernandez. Go read the trial record. There's no evidence of financial transfers. There's no evidence of bank records. There's no evidence of cocaine shipments. All you have is the testimony of two drug dealers with an axe to grind. It's disgraceful. President Trump did the right thing. President Trump framed the removal of Maduro as a victory for America's economic hegemony, pointing to Venezuela's estimated 300 billion barrels of oil reserves, the largest in the world. Now, Trump's critics today again keep saying this isn't about democracy, this isn't about drug trafficking, this is about oil. Well, they're partially right. If the United States can prevent Venezuelan oil from going to China and Russia, which is exactly what the president has done, that is a major win for the United States. Removing Maduro, a puppet of Beijing and the Chinese from office will also make it more difficult for China to harvest the country's natural resources in their quest for global dominance. Another crucial aspect of Maduro's arrest will be the effect of narco-trafficking, as we said. Maduro is one of the most notorious drug traffickers in Latin America who operated a network through nations like Honduras and Guatemala to funnel drugs to the U.S. southern border. A bogus narrative being circulated by the fake news media and echoed by Massey, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, is that President Trump is a hypocrite because he removed Maduro while subsequently pardoning Honduras President Hernandez. We addressed that. It's a fraud. President Trump, during a press conference last week, noted that Hernandez was persecuted very unfairly by Biden. He also said that Hernandez was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. President Trump also noted that his historic pardon for Hernandez allowed the National Party, the pro-U.S. party, the anti-drug trafficking party in Honduras, to triumph in the election just 3 days later. So President Trump acknowledged that U.S. forces had operated inside Venezuela during this secret mission and did not rule out a limited on-the-ground presence tied to energy and security objectives. He said, we're not afraid of boots on the ground, but we're going to make sure that the country is run properly. The balancing act between having enough military personnel in Venezuela to manage the aftermath of Maduro's ouster and making sure that it does not become an Afghanistan or an Iraq-style quagmire is no small feat. And it must be navigated by the Trump administration in the months to come. But this could be helped through the Department of Justice cooperation with the former head of their military intelligence, Hugo Carvajal, who has been languishing in a New York prison, but knows where all the bodies are buried. Although the situation is far from settled, the immediate triumph of the Venezuelan operation should restore faith in President Trump's rebuilding of our armed services, if nothing else. Just 4 years ago, the military was running out of Afghanistan with their tails between their legs, surrendering that country to the Taliban, and losing literally billions of dollars of extremely sophisticated military equipment, as well as the lives of at least 13 American service members. And at the same time, of course, transgenders were being let into the military. Recruits were being taught critical race theory heresies to hate the nation they were supposed to be defending. Diversity quotas took precedence over having an elite and lethal fighting force. Those days are over. Under Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, America has returned to having a lean, mean, lethal fight to keep the peace and to protect America's interests abroad. Now it's clear in the rearview mirror, an afterthought in President Trump's America. Even those who are critics of the Venezuelan intervention, such as the libertarian commentator Dave Smith, have had to admit that the impressive precision nature of the effort to remove Maduro was extraordinary. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of Democrats in the House, complained that the Trump administration had not given either he nor Chuck Schumer any heads up on the impending arrest of Maduro. First of all, Trump had no legal requirement to do so, and we all understand, that either Schumer or Jeffries would merely have contacted Maduro to tip him off as to what was to come. The president was wise to keep what they call OPSEC, Operation Secrecy, in this entire mission. The ouster of Maduro will make a more stable political sphere in Latin America and further signals the zeitgeist shift within Latin American politics. You see it today happening in places like Honduras, Chile, Ecuador, and Argentina. Elections there have resulted in colossal victories for more conservative pro-U.S. candidates and parties fighting against socialism and corruption. The momentum is firmly on the side of America's efforts to embrace capitalism, free markets, and the rule of law. President Trump's operation against Maduro has poured gas on this righteous fire engulfing our southern neighbors, and we should all be as jubilant as we can about these developments as Latinos who hit the streets over the weekend celebrate. What's particularly amusing is to see left-wingers, liberals, protesting the invasion, or I should say the operation in Venezuela, saying that they're standing up for the Venezuelan people. Yet anyone who watches media will see the Venezuelan people on the streets of Caracas celebrating the fall of a brutal, brutal dictator. So I see exactly the same people who are trying to say, well, this is like Iraq, this is like Afghanistan. No, not at all. It's very, very different. Oh, by the way, all those Democrats who complain about Iraq and Afghanistan, if you go back and look on the record, they all supported those incursions. It was libertarian Republicans who were skeptical. Yesterday on my show, Senator Bob Torricelli, former member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, admitted that his support for the second Persian Gulf War was a vote that he greatly felt was improper, and he apologized for. And then I had to point out to, well, you were lied to, Senator. You were told that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. You were told and lied to by Vice President Dick Cheney. You were lied to by Colin Powell, who was then the National Security Advisor, who said that the Iraqis had yellow cake uranium with which to make nuclear devices. And then the biggest lie of all, they told us that Iraq had participated in the attack on America on 9/11. Completely and totally false. As Venezuela's longtime strongman Nicholas Maduro and his wife were hauled to New York to a federal courthouse to face narco-terrorism and gun-running charges, the new regime in Caracas has suddenly seen the light. Maduro's vice president, and now the self-declared interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez, rushed to offer an olive branch to Washington, signaling her willingness to, quote-unquote, cooperate with the United States after years of socialist belligerence. The message came hours after Maduro's overnight capture by U.S. Special Forces, an operation that shows, once again, how America's military is back to being an effective force that must be reckoned with around the world. Rodriguez spoke of a, quote, balanced and respectful relationship and proposed a so-called cooperation agenda with the United States. In other words, they're capitulating because they don't want to be the next to get the Maduro treatment. This is exactly how you cow a communist dictatorship. One thing I can tell you right now, that is there's great nervousness in Havana. There's great nervousness in Honduras. There's great nervousness in Mexico, every place where socialism is lorded over the people. With U.S. naval assets off of Venezuela's coast and Washington clearly prepared to escalate, the Venezuelan regime's tough talk evaporated the moment potential consequences became tangible. One thing I know about Donald Trump, he is a man who does what he says he will do. He's proven that he's not a politician, but more precisely the leader of a political movement. And these guys, well, they fooled around and they found out the hard way. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. The Iranian regime may be on the brink of collapse. We're going to talk about that when we get back and what should happen in that country. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial and keep listening because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. The successful removal of Nicholas Maduro in Venezuela has put the hostile Iranian regime on notice. Nationwide protests against the Islamic dictatorship in Iran have entered a second week, driven largely by economic collapse, a plunging currency, and soaring prices. The quality of life has become untenable in Iran. Demonstrations have spread to 26 of Iran's 31 provinces, with roughly 1,000 arrests reported. Clashes with police have left at least 12 people dead, including members of the security forces. This new challenge is hitting Iran's aging supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, at his weakest, following President Trump's bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities only last year, which demonstrated how weak and defenseless the regime really is, and when their tough talk is actually confronted. Iran is a vast country of more than 90 million people, and unrest has been uneven and sporadic. It takes enormous courage to stand up against this brutal dictatorship. They have had no problems whatsoever murdering those in the democratic resistance, sometimes mass executions done in public for the purpose of telling the Iranian people what will happen if they rise up against their own government. As usual, President Trump has not minced words. Speaking aboard Air Force One, he warned Iran that they would be hit very hard if protesters were killed, hinting at possible military consequences if Iran does indeed begin killing or persecuting those who are protesting. After watching Nicholas Maduro be swiftly removed and hauled before U.S. courts, Tehran's leaders are clearly taking note. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly urged Washington to confront Iran's ballistic missile program again, with Iranian officials accused the U.S. and Israel of meddling, although notably this time with softer language, now that they understand that President Trump is for real when it comes to bombing them if necessary. So even if Tehran wanted to turn over a new leaf, well, it may be too late for that. Iran has been too belligerent in supporting terrorism for much too long. The time has come for the Ayatollah to take a perp walk similar to Maduro. It does not mean that President Trump should launch again an Iraq war-style invasion of Iran. It's not what we propose. Look at his limited projection of American power in Venezuela, previously in Iran, and you have what is in essence the Trump Doctrine. You've heard of the Monroe Doctrine? In this hemisphere, I think we should call it the Don-Roe Doctrine. We will not tolerate communist dictatorships and narco-drug trafficking in our hemisphere. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone here on the Red Apple Audio Networks, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone, where we mainline politics. Minnesota Governor Tampon Tim Walz announced on Monday that he's dropping out of the 2026 race and will not seek re-election. And I think he's just getting out of Dodge while his administration faces mounting scrutiny over massive fraud scandals that are rocking the state. Walz claimed that he can no longer, quote, give a political campaign his all after what he calls an extraordinarily difficult year, insisting his focus must be on protecting Minnesotans from criminals who prey on our generosity. My question is a simple one. What did Tim Walz know, and when did he know it? The scale of the thievery of federal funds earmarked for daycare, funds earmarked for transportation of the elderly, funds earmarked for other COVID-19 programs is breathtaking. This is going to be not a scandal limited to the state of Minnesota, not a scandal limited to the Somalian community, although it is interesting that 89% of Somalians living in the United States today are on welfare. That's a hard, cold fact. Walz, of course, is spouting nonsense about his inability to focus on a political campaign. The truth is he enabled these fraudsters every step of the way. The widespread fraud tied to Minnesota's Medicaid waiver programs and the COVID area relief funds all have happened because Walz refused to hold the Somalis accountable, painting them as if they were model citizens just because of their skin color and refusing to investigate them over fears of supposed racism. According to federal officials, since 2018, as much as half of the $18 billion paid through Minnesota's Medicaid waiver system may be fraudulent, and the number increasingly seems to get larger every single day. Republican state legislators believe that Walz should resign now and potentially face criminal charges for his role in the scandal. Walz, who took office in 2019 and then, of course, was improbably selected as Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate, where his effeminate hand gestures and his multiple lies about his military service, about his athletic record, set off alarm bells, has harmed the state tremendously through his inept governance. Kelly Loeffler, who's the head of the Small Business Administration, announced the suspension of nearly 7,000 Minnesota borrowers in suspected fraud involved in roughly $400 million in PPP and EIDL loans. The Small Business Administration has also halted more than $5.5 million in annual federal support to the state, with federal investors circling and funding frozen. Walz's exit is the collapse of another would-be Democrat icon. Get him on the short bus out of St. Paul as soon as possible. Audits stretching now back more than a decade show that Minnesota's child care assistance program has been riddled with weak oversight, poor record keeping, and chronic inability to detect fraud, failures now exploding into a national scandal. The issue returned to the spotlight after an independent journalist, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not CNN or MSNBC, but an independent journalist who posts his findings on social media released undercover footage showing that multiple daycare centers, many tied to Somali-run networks, appearing empty or inactive despite their continued receiving of public funds. The expose triggered federal and state reviews and confirmed what orders have warned for years. According to reporting by CBS News, a May audit from the Federal Office of Inspector General examined 200 child care assistance payments and found repeated violations of attendance and payment requirements. Auditors concluded Minnesota likely made errors in at least 11% of payments to more than 11,000 children, an astonishing failure rate in a taxpayer-funded program. That audit bluntly warned that Minnesota's limited oversight of attendance records created a system ripe for fraud, waste, and abuse. While the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under Robert Kennedy has since pledged tighter monitoring, state officials themselves admit enforcement gaps remain. In January of 2025, Tiki Brown, head of the Children, Youth, and Families Department, conceded that the state lacked full authority and capacity to investigate attendance fraud. That admission echoes earlier findings by the Office of Legislative Auditor, which documented millions of dollars in proven fraud between 2013 and 2018. So independent journalist Nick Shirley, a man in his late 20s, reporting demonstrates the problem in a way that was unignorable, if there is such a word. Now the state will have to take notice and do something about it rather than make excuses for their inaction because of the public anger that's built up. But my friends, I assure you, before it's over, this scandal will spill over into Michigan, into Ohio, into Oregon, into Washington State, into California, and yes, indeed, into New York. So those who are in such a hurry to claim that Republicans will lose the 2026 election, they'll lose control of the House, demonstrate once again that they don't understand that in American politics, a week can be a lifetime. And we don't know what the atmosphere will be when we have another federal election, but we do know this. This financial scandal is just going to get bigger and deeper, and the people are going to be very angry when they see where their tax dollars have been squandered and stolen. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is escalating its response to what it calls serious misconduct by Senator Mark Kelly, announcing a formal censure and a full review of his military retirement status over statements in a video encouraging the military to buck orders and disregard the chain of command. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth confirmed that Kelly, a retired Navy captain still drawing a military pension, will receive an official censure letter and face a review of his retirement rank and pay. Geraldo Rivera took to social media to say that this was petty. No, I'll tell you what's petty. Petty is more serious than petty. Petty is urging our men and women in uniforms to disregard the orders of the commander-in-chief. It's called sedition, Geraldo. The review, ordered to be completed within 45 days by Navy Secretary John Phelan, could result in a downgrade of Kelly's rank and reduction in benefits. Hegseth says Kelly crossed a red line by releasing a video urging troops to refuse what he called, quote-unquote, illegal orders, clearly trying to cajole active military service personnel to disregard the orders of the commander-in-chief. Kelly, of course, could not identify any illegal orders at that time. Secretary of War Hegseth said 6 weeks ago, Senator Mark Kelly and 5 other members of Congress, all of whom were either retired military and in some cases had tight connections to the Central Intelligence Agency, released a reckless and seditious video that clearly intended to undermine good order and military discipline. As a retired Navy captain who's still receiving a military pension, Captain Kelly knows he's accountable for military justice, and the Department of War and the American people expect justice. I pointed out, I guess it was earlier this year, or earlier last year, that Senator Mark Kelly had been partners with a Chinese communist company that made surveillance balloons. I suggested that that was a treasonous activity and that he should be charged and that he should be tried. I noted at the time that the penalty under federal law for treason is capital punishment. The media, of course, skipped right over the trial part. They say, oh, Roger Stone says that Senator Mark Kelly should be executed because of his involvement with the Chinese company. No, we are still under the rule of law. They left that little part about the trial out. I do believe he should be court-martialed along with the others who appear in the video for undermining our national security for cheap partisan purposes. And I find it very disturbing that Senator Slotnick, his colleague from Michigan, predicted 2 weeks before a U.S. Army National Guardsman, actually a woman, was shot and killed in the streets of D.C., that was going to happen. It was very eerie that she would foresee that. I think that this is a seditious operation, the beginning of what could be a color revolution, an attempt to remove Donald Trump from office through the same kind of shenanigans we saw in the Russian collusion hoax, 2 phony impeachments, the January 6th operation, the so-called documents investigation, all of which, of course, has now been exposed as extra-constitutional. Just days after the inauguration of socialist Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson, the city's taken another hard turn towards lawlessness as Wilson attempts to outdo our new New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani as the most belligerently leftist demagogue in any mayor's office in the country. And an internal email from the Seattle Police Department reveals officers are now being instructed not to enforce laws that make open drug use illegal, instead referring all cases to a diversion program that has already been tried and failed. The directive, first obtained by We Heart Seattle, orders officers to route drug consumption incidents to LEA PDA, the so-called Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. This move effectively decriminalizes public drug use and invites further chaos amid an already deadly overdose crisis happening in the state. We Heart Seattle founder Andrea Suarez didn't mince words, warning that dealers know how to carry just enough drugs to avoid consequences and that addicts will now be coddled and have their destructive habits essentially subsidized by the state. Suarez said that Seattle will essentially be a sanctuary city for open-air illicit drug use. Police officers are also furious. Mike Solon, head of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, which is their union, called the policy horrifically dangerous, blasting what he described as suicidal empathy that prioritizes ideology over public safety. Solon warned the policy will only accelerate death, decay, and more crime on Seattle streets. Seattle tried this after the Washington Supreme Court's Blake decision disrupted law enforcement statewide in 2023, and overdose deaths and crimes surged so badly in the state that lawmakers were forced to reverse course. Despite that hard lesson, Seattle's new leadership is doubling down because they will enforce crazy socialist woke nonsense no matter how disastrous the results are. Speaking of violence, a man has been arrested after vandalizing the Cincinnati home of Vice President J.D. Vance, marking the latest example of leftist political terrorism aimed at conservative leaders. The United States Secret Service confirmed that a suspect smashed multiple windows at Vance's residence overnight using a hammer and also damaged a Secret Service vehicle parked in the driveway. Authorities stressed that the home was unoccupied at the time, and the vice president and his family, thank God, were safely in Washington, D.C. during the attack. The suspect, 26-year-old William D4, yet another transsexual, who I believe also went by the name of Julia, was taken into custody shortly after midnight, now faces multiple charges, including criminal damaging, vandalism, trespass, and obstructing official business. His first court appearance is scheduled for Tuesday, that's tomorrow, with potential federal charges coming next. Vice President Vance responded calmly, thanking law enforcement for their swift action, while urging the media to respect his family's privacy, particularly the privacy of his children. He described the incident as the work of a crazy person attempting to break in by hammering the windows. This follows a troubling pattern of political harassment targeting Vance. Last year, left-wing protesters confronted him while he was out with his young daughter, prompting widespread outrage among many Americans. Don't expect too much fanfare from the fake news media in this instance either. When violence or intimidation is directed at the party in power, it is too often minimized or excused. Attacking the home of a sitting vice president, regardless of party and regardless of motive, is not protest. It's terrorism, and it must be treated as such. The alleged perpetrator is part of the Antifa network of domestic terrorism, and they are more dangerous to the fabric of our republic than ISIS could ever hope to be. It's time for a crackdown against Antifa, so these leftist punk thug losers know that there will be serious consequences if they attack our elected officials, regardless of party. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone right here in the Red Apple Audio Networks. And whatever you do, don't touch that dial or stop listening, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I so appreciate those kind and warm words from Vice President J.D. Vance, and I thank God that he and his family were not in Cincinnati when his home was vandalized by some Antifa thug. Well, President Donald Trump is refusing to back down after being called a racist for exposing the problems with Somali immigrants in America. President Trump shared a chart on his Truth Social post highlighting welfare dependency rates among immigrant households in the United States. The chart, entitled Immigrant Welfare Recipient Rates by Country of Origin, showed that roughly 72% of Somali-born households in the United States receive some form of public assistance, one of the highest rates of any groups in the United States. Other countries and regions with welfare participation exceeding 50% include Bhutan, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, and several nations across Africa, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. As concerns mount amidst the stunning rate of fraud among Somalis in Minnesota, federal authorities are warning of serious consequences tied to ongoing fraud investigations as the immense crackdown is prepared for rollout by the Trump administration. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that Somali Americans found to be operating fraudulent businesses to exploit governmental grants and subsidies will face denaturalization and deportation. Patel described the cases uncovered so far as only the tip of a very large iceberg. The FBI has already surged personnel into Minnesota, where investigators dismantled a $250 million fraud scheme linked to the nonprofit Feeding Our Future operation. The operation involved sham vendors, shell companies, and money laundering tied to federal food aid meant for children during the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the case has produced 78 indictments and 57 convictions, most of them involving third world immigrants from Somalia. The findings underscore the urgent need for strict immigration vetting, tougher law enforcement, and an end to these policies that reward dependency. This may be our last chance to end this madness, with President Donald Trump being elected on an America First mandate to deport dangerous illegal criminals and fraudsters, as well as initiating the DOGE cuts to eliminate waste, fraud, and corruption. A special shout out to my good friend Scott Evans, the legendary Dilbert cartoonist and author, and an extremely astute political commentator. Scott delivered a deeply personal and inspirational announcement this week, revealing that he has converted to Christianity as he faces the final stages of a terminal cancer diagnosis. Adams, long known for his skepticism towards religion and faith, said the decision came after years of conversations with Christian friends who urged him not to wait. He expressed respect for believers who openly share their faith, arguing that genuine belief requires the courage to evangelize. Adams said that he planned to convert because of his estimation, if there's nothing beyond this life, nothing is lost. But because of the Christian understanding of eternity is true, everything is to be gained. Adams also disclosed grim medical news. Doctors have told him there's no expectation of a recovery, no chance of regaining feeling in his legs, and that additional complications, including heart failure, are now beginning to affect his breathing. While he says he's not currently in pain, Adams warned his many friends and followers to prepare for rapid changes in the weeks ahead. Despite his condition, Scott Adams says he intends to keep working and speaking publicly as long as possible, noting that engaging with ideas and current events helps keep him focused during an otherwise overwhelming, difficult personal time. As he's been here in the Stone Zone, he's a good friend. He's a shrewd analysis of the political scene. I say to you, God bless our friend, Scott Adams, and Godspeed. I thank you for joining us today in the Stone Zone on the Red Apple Audio Networks. And until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?